Hello. It looks like we are live. Now, okay, so this is going to be my first time live streaming on YouTube, so that's a thing. But I've been streaming on Twitch. And actually, most of the time when I was doing podcasts, a lot of that was kind of improvised anyway, so it's kind of like a way that I work things out. But I do have a list of things that I'm going to go through, and what we're going to talk about today is this idea about social contagion, but especially about states of mind. So some people talk about things like a contact high, and I think there's something to that. And there's certain weird experiences that I've had that I'm going to go into and kind of relate it to this topic. Let's see. I notice my camera's like kind of freaking out a little bit. It kind of bothers me. Damn it, I forgot to hit record, but I guess it's on YouTube, so it's not going to matter. But, okay, it says chat is disabled for the live stream. I don't want that to be the case. I don't know what's up with that. Whatever. Damn it, I don't want it to be like that. I'm gonna go to my YouTube channel and see if it has an option for that. It's live. Okay, so how spooky. I'm seeing myself live. Okay, let me see if I can turn the chat on. Maybe I just can't because I'm like new to this or something. So I'm just gonna move on. I think you can leave like regular comments. So, but that's really annoying because the whole point of this streaming is so I can talk to people. Okay, so here we go. So the first thing I'm going to go into is the most simple part of the idea. This is the one that I think will make a lot of sense, I guess. Kind of social contagion of states of mind that are the same state of mind. So, like if someone's afraid, I think that can make other people afraid. Like watching someone be afraid, I think there's like some element of your empathy and trying to relate and understand that person's perspective that will cause you to start to feel what they feel, especially if it's something like something that you would expect to have a shared experience about. Like, so if someone's afraid of like they're gonna die or something because of like a murder or something like that, I think it would be obvious that you would start to feel afraid with them. And so the example I'm going to give is actually much weirder than that, though. The example I'm going to give, let's see. So I have a couple listed here. I guess, so this one's a little weird. It's about an experience I had where I had a friend that was sober and I was on cannabis, and they didn't know this really, or maybe they did and they didn't say it, but they were acting a certain way when I first started talking to them, and then as we started to converse and kind of like we're having like a discussion about something kind of intellectual. I don't exactly remember what it was, but it was kind of just like sharing like some hypothesis about people or how things work generally. And what I noticed is that I was kind of having like my train of thought was getting derailed and stuff, and I would sort of talk slow, and I don't know, I would kind of like tangent off and stuff like that. And I noticed that my friend started to do that too, and I think that's because he is paying attention to me, trying to track what I'm saying, and I think it's kind of putting him in a similar state of mind. And now it's almost like he's experiencing something like I am due to the THC, except he's experiencing it because he's talking to me. And I think people do that to each other a lot, actually. Like when people talk about like reading the room or like feeling the vibes of things, I think that the vibe is contagious. And there's a weirder example now that it's actually a very, very weird experience. Okay, so I was doing a podcast a couple years ago. I mean, a particular episode of the podcast, I mean. And what ended up happening is I would basically take THC and do the podcast in that state. Then, a couple years later, after I stopped THC entirely because I didn't like the effects I was getting, I listened to, I was reviewing some of the podcast while driving to basically a social gathering, kind of like a party, and while listening to it, I noticed that I was kind of re-entering the state of mind, and it started to feel like as if I had taken THC, and I even started to get paranoid. Like, me listening to myself recorded while high kind of like brought me back into that mental space. And I think it was really weird that I would get even paranoid and feel kind of intoxicated. Okay, so those stories are kind of short. I'm not going to go too much into them because I think the idea of like people empathizing and in training each other to the same state of mind is a little bit more obvious. Like if you hang out with someone that's getting like bad vibes, you might feel bad, or if you're like depressed and then you go hang out with like happier people, you might like get on their level and then it helps you. But that's sort of like more obvious. Okay, so there's weirder kind of dynamics when it comes to, so those are like, I would describe those as like symmetrical. What we just went into, that's like kind of like, you're basically like entering the same state as someone else. But I think there's other things that transfer that are not just kind of like absorbing the same stuff as the other person or whatever. I think there's also roles that we take on where it's kind of like, okay, so another thing that I would notice, I'll give an example. Another thing I noticed while on THC was that so I would take edibles and then I would use eye drops, and I would make it so that theoretically people wouldn't be able to just tell that I was on THC for any obvious reason unless my behavior was different. But the thing is, the weirdest part about this was that I would go to places like the grocery store and people would treat me differently. Like, I would sort of feel like, it would feel like people were giving me like more dirty looks, or not exactly dirty looks, but they would look judgy or dominating in a certain way. It's kind of hard to articulate that, but it caused me to get really nervous about going into the store. And I kept thinking like either I'm crazy and I think that people are acting different, or people are actually acting different. And I couldn't really figure it out because it's like, I don't think anyone could conclude that I was high, but maybe I was acting different in like some other way, or maybe I was just more sensitive to people's like mildly hostile tones, you know? Which I do think some of that might have been happening too. But that is until I started to experiment with people. This is where it got really weird. I decided to intentionally change my behavior Because something else I noticed on cannabis, or THC, is that I would become submissive to some degree. I become more like small, emotionally and mentally and socially small. I'd be more afraid of people. I'd be more afraid of people hurting me. I would desperately want the vibes to be good. Like, I wouldn't want to be challenged in that state, I think. And because of that, because I was more afraid of, like, kind of like antagonistic interactions or judgment or harm, I would change my behavior in response to that. So I would talk softer. I think I would hold myself in a, like, physically weaker way. And I felt more like a child in a way. And so that's where the experiment comes in. The experiment was that I decided to intentionally change my behavior to be more dominating. Like, I started to wonder if maybe this was what's happening. And so with my ex would kind of like, I kept noticing so the thing is, like, when I'm thinking of people at the store, that's like one thing. But then, like, well, okay, the thing about the people at the store treating me differently, they're all like strangers. Like, I've never met them. It would be very strange for them to, like, it's like they can't notice that I'm acting different, right? So, like, the thing is, like, my ex would treat me different when I was high, even though she would claim to not know that I was high, and I thought she was judging me. I thought she was mad that I took the THC or something weird like that, but she wasn't willing to admit to it. So I kept thinking, like, she's noticing I'm high and she's being kind of a bully because of it. But then it didn't really make sense because the people at the store were kind of judging me in a weird way, or treating me differently in a similarly kind of bullyish or dominating way. And obviously they don't know me, so they can't be like, I think I noticed that he's high. Instead, it would be like, they would have to conclude something like, I'm mentally ill, or maybe I'm just, like, shy, or something like that. I think part of it is that, like on some level, I'm probably acting less masculine on THC, I think. I'm not fitting within the roles that I'm supposed to be while I'm high. And, okay, so basically, the experiment was that I decided to just kind of jarringly shift my tone with my ex-girlfriend. And, so I would talk very soft, like, I would talk like, hey, how are you doing? But then I suddenly shifted, and I'm like, hey, so I was thinking that we should do this. I'm sort of feeling like, like, I would just instantly go into, like, this, hey there, how are you doing today? I'm feeling great. Like, like, I started, like, just LARPing as this, like, very, like, I think I probably did it even more genuine than I'm doing right there. But I basically started LARPing as this more, like, masculine, dominant figure. And then my ex-girlfriend went from, like, dominating to, like, really submissive and kind of almost, like, obedient. And, honestly, this was disturbing to me. This was like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? Like, I expected, okay, the thing is, like, if I was acting that dominant, in my mind, the reason I think I wasn't doing that is because I thought that her response was going to be like, why are you being a douchebag all of a sudden? And, like, I thought she would, like, escalate and compete for dominance with me. But instead, it was like, it was almost like she wanted that from me. She wanted me to be more like this sort of like I don't want to say parental, but like dominant, strong, not a coward. And then it's like, then she could like relax and go into something more submissive where she feels like she doesn't have to I don't know, lead the way or be the leader. And I think when she is forced into that leader position, she actually gets really stressed out, and she's like, come on, can't you do this the right way? Like, I feel like that's what happens. Like, she'll start to like freak out that she's forced into the leader position, and she's like trying to make me do whatever it is. Like it seems I'm like this helpless, fragile little thing, and she has to take care of me, basically. And I think THC was basically inducing that into me. And similarly, I think that while I'm at the store, the people are treating me differently because I'm not fulfilling, like, I'm like this weak little twiggy THC intoxicated, like half female creature or something. And full disclosure, I didn't really grow up with a father figure. So that might actually be related here. Like I'm gonna try to remember that and come back to that. I'm gonna write it down real quick. Lack of father figure. So I wrote that in the notes. We're gonna come back to that because that ties into something we're about to get into. Okay, well, I guess we can just go that direction now. So the thing is, okay, well actually, how does this relate to Contagion? That's kind of important. So rather than Contagion of like me acting dominant and forcing the other person to act dominant as well, which that might happen with certain people. Like I would imagine if that were to happen, that would probably be between two male figures. That would be my guess, because there's probably like a pressure to compete and not let your guard down, and like we can't be weaker than the other person or something like that. But generally, I think there's also another pattern that takes hold where if I act dominant, the other person is prompted to act submissive. And if I take a leadership role, I think that prompts other people to start engaging in a follower role. Like if you just start leading the way, I think a lot of people will actually just start letting you do that, unless they have like some sort of like anxiety about that and they want to like take control. It'll kind of depend. Like if you're like becoming the leader and doing things that people don't want, that'll obviously be bad. But if you're like the leader where you're like trying to see like, how does everyone feel? Like, do they all want to do this thing? Does everyone want to play this game? Am I like forcing my agenda down people's throats? Like if you're thinking about that and trying to be the leader at the same time, and you're considerate of other people's desires, they will just let you. Again, unless there's like some sort of thing where like people are probably like people with like traumas where they're forced into a leadership position. Like if I don't know if I guess I can get into I don't know if I should get into that actually. I'm not going to go that direction yet because that derails. Okay, so basically I don't know, and I think if you take a submissive role, people will actually feel imposed. They'll feel like a leadership role imposed on them. So like in the case I described, where I think that my ex was actually very uncomfortable with my submissiveness, I think it was like, I'm almost like pitting the responsibility onto her in a way where she's like, what the fuck? I don't want to do this. Why are you making me do this? And then she's kind of like has like this attitude of annoyance over the fact that I'm not taking the leadership role. And I think that's often happening in gendered norms. Okay, let me see. Okay, so the idea here with Contagion, okay, the easiest way to explain it would be like, if we ignore all this gender stuff and like how we're supposed to be a certain way, there's also something where I think, okay, what I've noticed in my life is that I'm extremely submissive around family members, and it seems to be like some sort of like trauma thing. I don't fully understand it all the time. It's something I haven't really like figured out. But what I do know is that I can't be myself around a lot of my family members, and that sometimes kind of automatically extends to people who are older than me. So I think it's something like something with authority is part of it. I have ideas about why I don't like authority, but I think that's not exactly connected to this submissive tendency. I think the submissive tendency probably stems from like my fear that other people will abuse their power, actually might be it. So like, for example, my mother was kind of chaotic, and there was a lot of weird things that would happen. And so like, I think it's possible that she trained me to be afraid of like, if I would dissented her or rebelled in any way, I think the level of punishment would be possibly unfair, such that I might so in that sense, like, my mother might have taken a leadership role that had some toxic components to it, and because of that, I think that when other people automatically kind of like take that leadership role, or they're in a position where they have power over me, I think I get very afraid of them exploiting that power in wrong ways. And so with my other family members, like, there'll be certain things, like times in my life where I'm more financially dependent on them, and during those times I would feel very afraid of them knowing anything about me, or I would be afraid to disagree with anything they said, which means I would start like, I would let them misinterpret me, I would let them judge me in ways that are wrong, I would let them impose beliefs on me that I disagree with. I would just kind of like shut my mouth and let it play out. And so, but at the same time, I would also feel like this resentment all the time with people who have that kind of power over me. And I would feel like snappy, and sometimes I did snap. So the weirdest thing about this, though, is that I would become so submissive that it's like I'm a child. It's like reverting into like this childlike state. And then I noticed things like I would invite my friends over to where I was living, and my family was there, and then I would be really afraid of like intermixing these two groups of people, because I was completely compelled to behave submissive around my family, but then around my friends it was more equal. And I would get really afraid that my connection to my family would start spreading to other people. And so like how that would look would be, my family would interact with me, I would be submissive, but then if my friends interacted with me, I was too afraid to act equal around them with my family around, to watch me do it. Like, I wouldn't want to show that side of myself, where I'm more like confrontational maybe, or dominant, or sticking up for myself. And I felt like that opened like this creepy doorway for people to engage, my friends to engage with me in a way that like now they have dominance over me. And then I would get scared that like even after we leave that scenario, it would linger. Like I would still be behaving submissive with my friends because it already started. Like we were already in that place. Now I would have to like just switch again, you know? Like that's weird. And so this is where the contagion component comes in. I think that engaging with people who would dominate you, I think it would change the dynamics with even other people. Like if someone dominates you and then you go to talk to other people, I think it extends. I think it starts to spread, where basically the dominant person is conditioning you to do certain behaviors, like to act a certain way. And I think that's entirely based on our fears and our sense of like what we're rewarded for and what we're punished for. And people who have power over us, they basically have the power to hurt us in ways or offer rewards. Like a famous person can basically dangle their opportunity for fame in front of you, and you'll bend to their will. You'll do more of what they say because they present an opportunity for you to gain something. Someone who's rich would also do that. But then also someone who has a lot of power over you can also punish you in a way that you can't defend or something like that. Like someone with a gun would be the most obvious case, right? You would do what they say and they can freak you out and spit in your face and do all kinds of things or whatever. So, if I think that a lot of this becomes like this kind of habitual thing. So like if you spend a lot of time around someone that dominates you, I think once you go into a space that like a friend group where you don't have that interaction with, you might carry it over because you're stuck in that mindset. It's like a state of mind. And I've observed this happen. I've also observed good things happen. Like there's been a time, there's a particular person that I've interacted with where the experience was so positive and uplifting that it made me happier, and I carried that over to the other parts of my life. But then if it's kind of like, even if, like, let's say you argue with a bunch of people, you get defensive, and then you just turn off, like say it's in a chat, a Facebook chat, and then you turn off Facebook, and then you just go in your room. It's not like that's just gone, right? Most of you have probably experienced something where it's like you're still thinking about that. You still feel defensive and annoyed. And it just lingers. So then if I say that happens, I fight with them, I'll be defensive, and then if I go with my other friends and start expressing that defensiveness where otherwise I wouldn't have come off like that, I think that they might kind of automatically take a role of trying, I think some of them, they'll either back you up, or they might start to justify the opposition. And I think there's probably a lot of context that would change whether or not people do that, but if they start defending the opposition because of your defensiveness, then it basically starts to spread. And I think people who are less close to you will have less obligation to just defend you without knowing the full context, and they also know you less. So someone who knows you a lot, actually, the idea of knowing someone a lot, that gets really spooky. People impose, I don't know if you saw my latest video, but it's basically about that topic. It was called Soul Indoctrination. It actually ties into this. I'm on a whole binge of this realm of topics, if you haven't noticed. So kind of the idea with if people know us, each person knows us to be a different person. There's all different kinds of identities that people impose onto you, and they condition you to see yourself like that. The Ash conformity experiment. They basically, if you don't know, they get one person, a subject, and then they get 12 actors who pretend to be subjects, and all of them are sitting at a table, and they're presented these pictures. The pictures show like lines of different lengths, right? And then there's basically two pictures. There's one picture with like 3 different lines of different lengths, and then there's a picture over here that's just one line. And then the scientists are like, okay, which of the lines over here matches the one here? And the answer is generally very obvious. So at first, all of the subjects agree with the correct answer. But then by like round 3, all the fake subjects start lying. And with conviction, they say the wrong answer, the super obviously wrong answer. And it causes the subject to freak the fuck out. Like he or she looks at the picture and is like, what the fuck? Like, what? How are you answering this like that? And then they start to actually conform to it. They start to doubt their own answer, and they just give the answer that everyone else is giving. And I think that happens with everything. I think our sense of morality is informed heavily by what other people validate as a reasonable thing to feel concern about. Like the reason people don't feel as concerned about like factory farming is because everyone around them is okay with it, or they're expressing no concern. And so like everyone else feels fine with not expressing concern too. But then when it comes to our sense of self, that's the spooky thing. People around us might converge on the idea of who we are. And that's what the Soul Indoctrination Project is about. It's about how, like for me, I was diagnosed ADHD, and then my family, my mom particularly, starts imposing this idea of who I am or how my mind works and like what I'm capable of in school. And I think that creates a whole system of beliefs. Like, say I fail something, some part of the narrative is going to be like, well, you have ADHD, that explains it. So then like I might not do homework and be like, well, I have ADHD, that explains it. Whereas other people are like, no, I don't want to be stupid. I have to try hard. Everybody's like expecting me to do really good. And then they like do the homework even though they don't want to or something. So there's a lot of weird stuff. And then, so when it comes to things like traumas, I think people get trained into like roles that they're not supposed to have. Like for me, I was trained to be very submissive to authority in a way that probably caused me to be not dominant enough according to the gendered norms of society. And that has caused me to face weird problems, which I've kind of described a little bit with, or at least, I guess that was on THC, but I've experienced similar things generally too, just not to that degree, not to such a high contrast or such an obvious contrast. But I've also noticed like that while I'm with my friends, I sometimes get really submissive or agreeable, or afraid to stick up for my own desires, which gets into weird things like this is me acting possibly more submissive and feminine, which that gets into weird things like consent or something, like people having trouble saying no or something, which we don't have to get into here because that gets weird obviously, but just me saying it, you probably got a lot of ideas thinking about that, maybe. Okay, I'm gonna check back to, well, I guess that gets into what I said, lack of father figure. That kind of ties into there. Since I did not have a father figure, I think I didn't learn how to be a traditional masculine person. And yeah, that's basically it for that. We don't have to go too deep into that. Okay, let's see. There's other weird things. Like, I was thinking about, I guess I didn't get into BPD. Oh my gosh. Okay, first let's get into depression. I think some people who are depressed, there's a weird dynamic. Like, okay, I get into depressive ruminations. I ruminate about things I'm really upset about. And, you know, I mentioned there was a particular person I talked to that had a really uplifting effect on me. And, but then one day, I brought up the distressing things that were bothering me. And I actually realized, like, in that moment when I brought it up, I realized that I was actually tainting that connection I had with the person. Like, immediately, I think it causes the other person to go into, like, this caretaking role, and they want me to feel better. Like, if I'm upset, they want me to feel better. So then it prompts this, it basically cues a role. Like, when I'm talking about these roles, like dominance and submission, this is like another particular role that it doesn't really necessarily fit into the dom or sub type thing. Instead, it's like and maybe it does in a way, but it's also a separate entire thing. And it's like this caretaking thing, like, oh, I'm sorry. How are you doing? How do you feel now? Like, next time they talk to me, they might be like, are you feeling better? And they check in on me. And then actually, that kind of prompts me to go back into the distressing topic. So instead of, like, this person acting as my escape from that distressing topic and kind of reorienting my mind in a different direction, it's now become that person reminds me of the things that upset me. Now their role has shifted, and their existence in my life is to prompt me back into distressing ruminations. Now, it didn't stay like that, because I brought it up to them, and we kind of talked about that a little bit, and I don't think I don't know. I think we're just cautious about it, I think. But the weird thing is that I notice that I'm contagiously spreading this role. Like, if I'm depressively ruminating and I talk to people about it, it leads to the other person adopting this role of, like, do you feel okay now? How are you doing? Oh, I'm sorry. Like, you know. And that starts to spread to each person that I talk to. And I realize people with depression might... Some of the people, not everyone. I think there's different ways to be depressed. There's a lot of different ways. So, but I think one way that people might get trapped in depression is that they're actually creating a mental, social space that eliminates any capacity to escape and enter, like, a happier domain of existence. And I realized that was kind of what I was doing sometimes. Like, I was creating this weird bubble of exploring the things that are hurting me and just hyper-focusing on it rather than trying to have a good time. And, yeah, so I think that happens. I think depressed people might inevitably or inadvertently program the people around them. Okay, so now it gets weird. Now we're finally at the borderline personality problem. So before I get into this, when I told this to someone, their response was that there's a strong genetic component. I didn't look up the genetic component, but I don't think I have to, because like, think about, like, schizophrenia or something. A lot of them become homeless, or they do nicotine at very high rates. but also people would view schizophrenia as being a genetic sort of thing. I don't fully agree, but let's just say that it's kind of true. In that case, that should also mean that whatever the very strong correlates are, like nicotine use or homelessness, those are kind of genetic in a weird way too. Like if schizophrenia is this genetic thing, it's leading people into a life path that results in environmental consequences. So I think that sort of applies to basically any of these things. Wow, I really, just a side note, I really wish the chat wasn't disabled. I just wish it wasn't. I can't believe that it is. But, alas, let's continue. Okay, so borderline. I got some bullet points outlined. Okay. I've been thinking that some of my problems recently are kind of like borderline. But it's kind of a weird thing. I'm gonna get water. You can really taste the lead in the water. It's pretty good. Add some nice sparkly bitter taste. No, I'm just kidding. But okay. Borderline. Okay. I'm trying to think if I should get into my story of, well, okay. The thing I've been thinking with myself getting borderline is like, okay, me doing these projects online puts me in a really weird position sometimes, because I work really hard on a lot of these things, and a lot of my life gets focused on them. And then when I'm with like normal friends, I think talking about these projects isn't that good. I think there's like a whole cultural thing about like, it's sort of like annoying or self-promotion-y. But not necessarily. I try to make sure that it doesn't come out like that, because it's like the stuff I'm making for content or whatever, it's literally like the things I'm most interested about, and they're all things that I feel are relevant to like my relationship to my friends, and like I'm literally kind of making content about our lives. So it's like pretty relevant, and like sometimes, and I mean this isn't what I was trying to get into actually, but sometimes, just as an example, like in my last video, I was like making it and I'm thinking like, sometimes I tell stories about my life so that like a friend knows me a little bit better, and we share stories like that to get to know each other. And I feel like I'm doing that, but I'm making like this very effortful video and trying to make it all like I'm like I don't know, I'm trying to make it aesthetic, consumable, more entertaining, more feeling good, I guess. I don't know. I'm trying to make the ideas focused, direct, emotional, and but then I start thinking things like, nah, this is so tangential, but I'm gonna just keep going. We'll get into the borderline thing in a second, but this is kind of a weird, trippy thing I was thinking about recently anyway, and it's kind of connected. Okay, so like when I think about like whether or not my friend would watch it, it feels weird because like there's some component of like, it's almost like people on principle wouldn't want to watch it, but like, well, friends, I think like there's some sort of thing where it's like they would probably listen to me give like a very shitty quality version of the story where I'm rambling for possibly longer, and not getting my points across, and it's like I don't know, just worse. And versus they would reject probably the video that I made about that same thing, almost on principle of like, oh, you're a content creator, I don't want to consume that. But then if I told my story, I think they would listen, even though it's almost the same thing, but I would rather them value the thing that I worked. Like if I worked like hours to like simplify my points to like this beautiful product, I almost feel like what the fuck? Like, why do you want to hear me? Like it becomes like this thing where I feel like ego is involved or something, and I always have that in my mind. But anyways, that's not related to the borderline thing. Okay, so the reason I actually brought up so the content creation thing, it puts me in a weird spot where like, I mean, it's kind of related, I guess, yeah. I can't really talk about what a lot of my life is about easily with my friends, because like this is what I'm doing a huge amount of the time. Like I'm putting a lot of effort into these projects. It's like a job, literally, pretty much. And so then it gets kind of weird, like, because I don't have as much to say unless I start like talking about that stuff. Like I'm not watching TV series, I'm not consuming things because I'm so invested in, I mean, I consume certain things, but I don't know, it just gets difficult. But then I'm trying to think why that's important again to the borderline thing. Well, let's just go into the other part. Okay, so when I make content, so I know what it is. Okay, I got the idea again. Okay, so the thing is, with people who are, I guess, the audience of content I create, the connection is not like being friends. But I think sometimes I get confused about the boundaries of things like that. So like, I guess it's that whole parasocial spooky thing, maybe. I don't know, but like there'll be like people that I talk to frequently for a while, but not really. Like I feel like they're, I think I might have to get into the actual theoretical concepts here first. But basically I think people want me to fulfill their needs as a content creator, like it's my role or job to do so. And then if I don't, it's like I feel like people abandon me. And but I also feel like people don't really fulfill my needs, and they're not supposed to. But that's where it gets like very spooky to me. Because then it starts to get weird. Like if I spread myself socially thin to like a lot of different people, then it's like I have less time to talk to friends, and I feel like I'm getting less close to people generally. Like I'm talking to all these people, but then I'm not really getting my needs fulfilled, and I'm talking to too many people. It's like a weird zone to be in, and that'll make sense in a second. Now let's get into the theory. We should have just gotten into the theory first. But maybe you'll get like epiphanies from what I said. So the big focus is about social needs and where those come from. So I think borderline people enter a space. Okay. Well, here's the thing. What I realize is like people in relationships, they talk about their needs being met, and then sometimes people argue against polyamory because they're kind of like why can't you get your needs met by that one person? Maybe your relationship is a problem. That's kind of like the argument I see a lot. Which this might oppose that. This might be a good counter argument. So okay, here's the thing. Our social needs are not entirely coming further, where they're not entirely met by our partners. Our social needs are met by friends, family, and our partner, and maybe even different kinds of people besides that. So So imagine a person, okay, so like in my situation with my ex, the thing is, like, my whole family network failed to provide my needs. I got kind of like disconnected from my mother passed away. My father was never really there. My extended family is pretty distant. I was cut off from my aunt and my cousins. Like, at one point my cousin was like my best friend for a long time. I was cut off from that because of family drama. Then my mom died, and I went to go live with my grandmother after a bunch of this, and I was really distant from them, as I kind of described earlier in the stream. And basically I was just never really close to any family, and they didn't, like, the needs that, like, okay, well, basically, with my ex-girlfriend, I started to integrate into her family. Like, they saw the place I'm at, they took me in as their own, and that was, like, amazing. Kind of changed my life, and I didn't realize how significant that was until after we broke up. And then I went into this in another video, it was one of the storytime videos, but basically all my friends were shared with my ex. Things got weird with my ex, like, very bad. And I kind of just, like, lost contact with, like, I was integrated to her family. I lived there at one point. I was, like, we'd basically chill with, like, her niece and stuff, who was kind of almost our age. And, like, we were connected to her whole extended family. Like, it was a whole big thing. I felt like I belonged in the world in a way. And then after we broke up, it's just like I'm floating away, like nothing matters. Like, I neglected building connections with my own family. The situation with having separate friends got kind of weird because my ex kind of would get jealous and weird, and there was a lot of barriers to me building friendships outside of shared friendships. Ow. So, and that's kind of what the video I went into before was about. Like, I have a kind of like a theory about why that was. She even kind of acknowledged it at certain points. Like, it used to be bad. Like, she would basically, like, spam call me if I was with friends and get really kind of clingy at the very beginning of the relationship. Then later it got better, but I also was being conditioned to not get close to other people. I would keep people at arm's length, and then later I suffered for that because now, like, I basically only made friends in ways that made her feel safe, which meant only friends with her friends. And now I basically just got nowhere now socially. Like, I lost everything. And in doing so, in losing my connection to her family, losing her, losing our friends, like, it was a lot of people. Like I feel like it would be like 30 plus people or something. I don't know. So it was really bad. And then now I'm, like, almost isolated, but not fully. And what I realized, though, is my social needs were spread across a lot of people. And now it's like I have a lot of social needs that don't get met. And I've noticed that I think I can see how people might impose their social needs in a way that's, like, super concentrated. Like, people in my position, they might need things from, like say I dated someone, I can imagine it getting weird where, like, because I have not enough people to feel close to, I might demand more from that person that they can't even give me without starting to like threaten their own networks of people. Like their connections and needs might be spread across like let's say 5 to 15 people, and what if I have just her? That could get really weird, right? I don't think I do that to people. I actually am still talking to a lot of people and spreading it across people, but I notice that there's like needs I can't get from people where I just build like this resentment and I get angry, and then I start thinking I'm crazy, and then I'm like, what if this is borderline? Like I will notice that like there'll be like some random person in my Discord server, and they'll be like talking to me sometimes, and then they just kind of like disappear, and I'm like, why do you neglect me? I want your attention. And that's kind of like a weird fear of abandonment, but I don't really do things about it. I think I just like start hopping around to different people, and I start talking to so many people and getting like a little bit of needs from each person. But it's also kind of like bad because I don't get close enough to people where it's like I'm forming super deep bonds. I do have super deep friendships, and sometimes I think I'm like greedy. Like why am I not satisfied by the immense depth that I get from certain people? Like I start thinking like, would I want to talk to people literally 24/7, getting like showered with love or something? And it's kind of weird because my ex would give me a lot of attention. Like she would want me to spend a lot of time with her. She would have to like get me to do it. Like I would be like kind of distant to her sometimes, and it would be like she was more demanding of my attention than I was of hers a lot of the time, until towards the end. But for the most part it was like that, and I think I didn't realize how important that was. Okay, so I think I went into most of the points about borderline, but basically I think we can have needs concentrated into like the borderline person might find one person and then demand so much from them that would normally be like what you would demand from like a network of people, like family, friends, and then you just demand it all from a single person, usually like a partner or something like that. And then that's so overwhelming to the other person that for them to give you those needs, to give the borderline their needs, would mean they would have to cut back on giving other people their needs, their family, their friends, their network. So I think people who lose everybody, they're probably extra prone to concentrating their needs on like lesser amount of people. And then there's probably like a point where if you demand way too much from someone, they're going to leave you, right? Because they can't handle that. They can't give you your needs. Or you'll start fighting with them about how you need your needs, because everybody needs their needs. And then it gets like weird, like there's something almost unfair about it. Like if you have a lot of your needs met by like family and friends, and then you date someone who only has you, I think that's actually fucked up. Like that's gonna end up in something not fair, right? Because then like what is the person supposed to do? Like just have some of their needs met by you, and then they're just gonna like watch as you fulfill the needs of as they fulfill the needs of their family and friends, and you're just like rocking in the corner in isolation or something, like I need things, and you're supposed to just like accept it. Like, is that how it's supposed to be? And then like for some reason the person with having like this healthy expanded social network is like they're just allowed to have it, and then I feel like jealousy and weird things start to play in there. It gets really weird, right? Like you see where I'm going? Like it's almost like fairness starts to break down. Like if you have more connections to people, that's kind of like it's not going to be fair for someone else who doesn't. And I think that's what brews more antisociality and resentment. And I think there's like a tendency for... Oh, actually, I want to say this idea first. I have it written down. Okay, so I was thinking like someone who's like really isolated, they might so I'm kind of describing how isolation or not having a really good healthy network that satisfies what you need socially, how that can lead to like a borderline pattern where you might start to demand too many needs from a single person, which then causes people to not like cut you off or not be able to satisfy your needs. And then you'll resent people because everyone else around you is like getting their needs met but not you, and then it's not fair. And then you start to basically probably become more abusive, and like you might lash out or start trying to control people, manipulate them, things like that. Okay, so there's the isolated pattern, but there's also a weird thing I think that might happen to people who are famous or very, very popular. I think that someone who's very, very popular, everyone around them will have less connections. They'll be more relatively isolated. And I think actually like someone who's like spreading their time very thin among people, other people will want more of that time and they won't be getting it from that popular person. And I think that relatively everyone else might start acting borderline with the famous person. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I've seen people do it. Like people will want the time of a famous person or a popular person more than they can actually have. Then they might start getting like weird about it, clingy or desperate for their attention. I think that sort of thing happens. But it's like weird because to them, everyone else is kind of acting borderline in a relative way. It's kind of trippy. It's like, I don't know. But I think you can have both at the same time. You can spread yourself thin in a way where you're only servicing other people and then not getting your needs met, and then you're like really resenting watching other people have their needs met. Like, I think it's way more complex. It's not about the number of people that you talk to. It's more about how your needs get met or not, or the fairness of your situation. It's kind of complicated, you see? Okay, so I think deviation from norms kind of leads down these paths, because I think, like, I don't know if I want to get into that. I always get into that point with every topic. But I think having different needs from... So what I wrote down is having different needs from others brews antisociality and unfairness. So, like, kind of like what I described, if someone else has their needs met by their family and friends, and then, so if there's like two people dating, one person has their needs met by family and friends, and they're trying to maintain those relationships, and then the other person is like isolated and doesn't have their needs met, but they have some of their needs met by the partner, but it's not fair because they're suffering with the rest of their situation. I think that brews like a sense of unfairness and antisociality. Like, it's almost like wealth in a way. Like, people feel an unfairness if someone's like wealthy or powerful versus like poor. I think it's kind of like that. Okay. I think I'm almost out of topics. I'm gonna check. I don't know if this is how it works, but I'm gonna check if wealthy or powerful versus like poor. Are there any comments? I don't even think people can comment on the live video. That's so annoying. Chat is disabled. Whatever. Dang, I feel like that just actually streamed. I'm sorry if I streamed the stream into the stream. I want to do more comedy streams. Not comedy exactly, but I want to be playful. I'm tired of being serious, and I'm tired of being alone on stream. I want to have fun. Okay. I can be playful alone in my room staring at a camera too, but it's kind of depressing, isn't it? No, it's not. It's not necessarily. But I don't know. It's easier to be playful with other people there, to react to what they're doing, to play with their thinking. It's hard to empathize with an audience I can't see or even know anything about. It's a little weirder. Okay. So, I think I'm going to probably end the stream here. We gone for an hour. And I want to try to figure out how to make it so chat is not disabled. Because fuck that. Hopefully the quality of this was okay. If you'd like to support the content, please join the Patreon below. If you found this relatable, drop a comment, like this video, and have a good day. See what I did there? I just LARPed being a different kind of person. Okay. Goodbye, YouTube. Goodbye, YouTube. You will not be able to reconnect. Your stream will stop and no longer be